This is our time now, and it's been through hard work and perseverance. You know, the neighborhood is where it is now and continuing to spiral up as far as rebirth, rebuilding is concerned.
When we got there 7 years ago, this was as low as it could get. It was lawless. It was Wild West up there. 7 years ago, we couldn't even get policemen to live there if we gave them a house.
There was a gang element. So we went through a Wild Wild West thing, you know. Folks shooting it out right in front of my house. I looked out and there was a guy there shooting, he's shooting, somebody shooting back down the street at him, you know. This neighborhood was the victim soon after we first moved here of just slum landlords.
Started around the late 70s, early 80s. That was a decline. Because most of the places that were destroyed or what have you came about because of absentee landlords, you know, and just not really caring. And I believe that's when most of it happened. That was the low point of it. And in most neighborhoods where that happens, that's quite a bit where it is, you know.
As you just heard, the two communities of West Florissant and Old North St. Louis share a past of decline and decay that began with the mass exodus from the city in the 1950s and 60s. Northern St. Louis was particularly hard hit by the resulting wave of disinvestment and disengagement from the community. The cyclic nature of community disinvestment is clearly seen in Old North St. Louis's 14th Street Mall, where population loss caused businesses to close, which in turn made the neighborhood less hospitable to residents and less attractive for them to stay or for others to move in. For the communities featured, their acceleration and redevelopment has come from two very different sources: individuals struggling to get loans, and anonymous private investors who donate millions.
I'm Sean Thomas. I'm the Old North St. Louis Restoration Group Executive Director. The organization itself has a mission of revitalizing the physical and social dimensions of the neighborhood in a manner that respects its historic, cultural, and urban character. It started 27 years ago by the residents of the neighborhood who had been working in their own homes trying to rehab those historic structures, recognizing that they couldn't just rehab their house while everything surrounding it collapsed. They needed to work together as a community to make the neighborhood what they knew it could become.
Then, like I say, folks were exiting the neighborhood. Some of them just leaving the buildings, selling them real cheap. And we have people who came along who bought the buildings not to live in them themselves, because they were old buildings. A lot of people, I don't want to live in that old neighborhood, an old building. You know, they picked up this property real cheap, and they became slum landlords. They bought up buildings, rented them out. They were real fragile anyway because they were very old, so they rented them out. They didn't care, and they literally milked these buildings for money until they just became really unlivable. Folks moved out, and the owners, slum landlords, had gotten their money plus 500%, you know, profit and more. And they just walked away from the buildings also. So the buildings continued to deteriorate, and just literally crumbled in on themselves. That's why we have a lot of vacant land mass, you know.
As you can see in the following scenes, one of the challenges that this neighborhood faces is the sheer amount of work that needs to be done. The work of individual rehabilitation can be slow and demoralizing if your work seems like an isolated, high-risk investment. For a revitalization to inspire confidence, it necessitates feeling more like a revolution, a mass movement, so that investors do not feel as though they are struggling against the tide, against the odds. On the other hand, large-scale interventions have been tried in the past and pulled the neighborhood down into deeper decline. With millions of dollars on the line, do the potential benefits outweigh the inherent risks?
The 14th Street Mall was an effort 31 years ago to redevelop what had been a declining commercial corridor of this neighborhood. But by the late 60s and early 70s, it had reached almost bottom, and they needed some major investments, so they closed off 2 blocks, created a pedestrian mall, and ultimately killed it. That was the cure that killed the patient in this case. So right now what we're doing is we've partnered with another not-for-profit called the Regional Housing and Community Development Alliance to redevelop these 2 blocks, 27 buildings altogether on the mall as well as on some adjacent blocks, to produce 80 units of housing, mixed income, some affordable, some market rate, as well as 33,000 square feet of commercial space.
Also, the mall that they're redeveloping now, called Crown Village, once we saw that, we knew that the property in this area wasn't going to be a bad investment. You don't want to buy a house, spend $150,000 fixing it, and then a week later you find out there's going to be a highway bulldozing it right next to you, or that the whole neighborhood's completely worthless and no one will even give you insurance.
And a lot of the new momentum started about 4 years ago or 5 years ago almost, with a plan to build some new houses at North Market. And a lot of that investment attracted others who saw that this was a place where there was a future, where somebody was investing some funds. Therefore, if they invested in their home, they wouldn't be alone, they wouldn't be out there all by themselves.
We had, the day before, driven around all of North St. Louis, and some of it was just plain frightening. Some of it was completely vacant land with one building stand up. But when we came over here, there were people working on buildings, there were people in hard hats walking up and down the street, scaffolding on just about every building. You could hear angle grinders cutting out old mortar. I mean, it was just like when we crossed West Florissant over into this neighborhood, it was like a whole different world, and it was a lot easier for us to feel comfortable.
Community involvement is characteristic of the redevelopment process in Old North St. Louis.
Well, before this all started, the whole North Market and all of that started, there were things to talk about, well, where should we try to do development, this, that, the other, and it finally settled on that North Market area, and then from there it kind of, and people talked about, what kind of houses should be put in there, how they should fit the street, and those kind of things. The latest thing was like a charrette, where people talked about how should besides just the buildings, what should the rest of the environment be in the 14th Street area to make it really, be kind of lively.
The redevelopment of Old North St. Louis has been gradual and mostly an individual process by rehabbers and the small efforts of the remaining core population loyal to the neighborhood. The past few years have seen the addition of a very new element: developers who are building streets of new houses. The neighborhood organization, the Old North St. Louis Restoration Group, could only gather community needs and be an information base for others for decades. Today, it is entering into the new realm of economic development by partnering with RHCDA, the Regional Housing and Community Development Alliance, in the rehabilitation and, with hope, the revitalization of the 14th Street Mall.